welcome back to the very second episode of HistoRE. It is the 27th of April 2020. It's a lovely sunny day in the United Kingdom, and it's just amazing how quick this year is flying by before our very eyes. And at the moment, it's probably a good thing that this year just flies by, gets done with. We can hopefully all go back to doing the things we love, go back to work, see our friends and family, and well, most of all to me, get a haircut, because my hair is always a mess. For anyone who already knows me can confirm, but it is more of a mess than usual. So that is something I am very much looking forward to having done. I don't necessarily agree with the protesters who are currently protesting the lockdown and trying to go outside and get a haircut currently. I think we should all just stick with the lockdown, see things through, and get a beautiful haircut at the end. But this is not the show for that. Today we are going to be talking about Abraham. So we're going to be talking about Abraham's call. We're going to be talking about the sacrifice of Isaac. We're going to be talking about how Abraham is not just an important figure within Christianity and Judaism, but also within Islam. So we'll be looking at some of the differences between the Islamic version of the story of Abraham comparison to the Jewish version and the Christian version, because of course there's a big difference in the sacrifice version of the story. So without further ado, welcome back to HistoRE. So we're going to be starting with a simple question. What makes a good father? So what qualities could you ask for in a father? You could ask for things such as a headache, because all fathers have got a headache. Grey hairs. Are you really a dad if you haven't got grey hair? Laryngitis from repeating requests to get off the phone. Tired hands from assembling and fixing stuff all day. Sock with holes. I'm looking at my socks now, and my socks have a lot of holes, and I'm not even a father, so that's not something reserved for the role of father. Tired feet from pacing the floor all day. An empty wallet, because are you really a dad if you're not spending all of your money on your children? And an ugly tie from last Father's Day. These are all things which make up the comical caricature of a father. But of course, the characteristics we really want in a father are people who are worth looking up to, so a good role model, someone who is wise and can pass on information of everything they've learned in their life, and so on. Why would this be important? Why would the role of a father be important in the story of Abraham? So Abraham is a central figure of Christianity, Judaism, and Islam, and religion as a whole. He is considered the father or patriarch of the Abrahamic faiths. So for those who do not know, the Abrahamic faiths are traditionally considered to be Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. They are the Abrahamic faiths because they are all united in their belief that we all descend from Abraham. This is the traditional Abrahamic belief. So, without further ado, Abraham lived over 4,000 years ago. So 4,000 years ago, if you can think back to that time, how different would the world be? So 4,000 years ago, what are we in now? 2020. So if we go back to 2200 BC, for example, the world was very different. So there was no Roman Empire yet. There was no Greek Empire. The world was vastly different. Egypt would be the leading superpower in the world at this time. So over 4,000 years ago, Abraham was a man who lived with his wife, Sarah. So Abraham and Sarah were, at this point in the story, a very elderly couple. And unfortunately for Abraham and Sarah, in their life they had not been able to become parents to children. For whatever reason, Abraham was unable to have a child. Sarah was unable to bear a child, and by the point of this story, they were both far too old to really even consider it. So this is where things change, because part of Abraham's significance in Christianity, Judaism, and Islam is that he is considered by many as being the perfect religious role model because he is unwavering in his faith to God. So despite all of the hardships Abraham had been fed in life, particularly his not being able to father a child, he is rewarded for his continued faith in God. So one night Abraham goes out and God speaks down to him. God speaks down to him in Genesis 12:3 in what is traditionally called the Call of Abraham. So a little bit of backstory. Before the Call of Abraham, Abraham, well, not so much Abraham, but Abraham's friends and family, rather, were considered to be polytheists, meaning they believed in multiple gods. So God chose to communicate directly with Abram, as he was then called. He would later be named Abraham, meaning father of the people. And God spoke to Abraham that there is one God. So this confirmed Abraham's faith in God. So Abraham had always believed in one God, despite his friends and family believing in multiple gods. So in Islam, for example, this would be a perfect demonstration of Tawhid, which is the belief in one God. In Christianity, another monotheist religion, again, it's belief in one God. And in Judaism, where there's only belief in one God, Yahweh, this is what this is. This is Abraham believing in one God. And God confirms to Abraham, basically, that Abraham was right. I am the only God. And this makes Abraham even more devoted, because it confirms that his faith was not wasted. Surely, in his old, elderly life, there must have been moments where he considered, well, I've believed in one God all my life, and yet I can't have the one thing I want. I can't have children. So maybe, at this exact moment, Abraham felt a strong flurry of emotions, positive emotions, which made him realize that this all was not for nothing. There is a plan, there is a God, there is the God, and this is now God speaking to me to tell me that I have been right. And the actual quote from Genesis 12:3 itself goes, I will make you into a great and powerful nation, and I will bless you. All peoples on earth will be blessed through you. And of course, the great and powerful nation, which God is referring to in the Christian Bible and the Jewish Torah, is of course Israel. And this is perhaps why the story of Abraham is maybe more important in the Jewish faith than it is to Christians. Of course, the Islamic version differs slightly, and we'll get to that either later in this episode or in a future episode. So, of course, this is a very important moment in which God speaks down to Abraham and says, you'll make a powerful nation. And obviously, to make a powerful nation from himself, he needs to be able to produce children, which is what later does happen with Isaac and Ishmael. Abraham and Sarah later travel from Ur, and they travel to Canaan. So, to put this into context, because of course these two names are no longer geographically significant in the present world, Ur is in present-day Iraq, I believe, and he travelled to Haran, which is in modern-day Turkey, and then he travelled from Haran down to Canaan, which is in present-day Israel. So, of course, this is where Abraham and Sarah both had Isaac and Ishmael, and this is, of course, where the great nation which God promised Abraham would form was born, and this is where Israel was born in turn. So this was the journey Abraham made after the call. So of course, after this, Abraham, she didn't have quite the same faith. Sarah did not have quite the same faith as Abraham at this time. When Abraham told Sarah that God had spoken to him and God had promised him that he would form or found a great nation in Canaan, she did not necessarily believe him. Whether or not she disbelieved him, we do not know, but we know for certain, at least from the scripture, that she was certainly skeptical, and she at first thought it was some kind of joke that Abraham was making, because of course she was, in her mind and his mind, too old to bear a child, and Abraham was too old to father a child. Abraham, of course, maintained his faith in God and believed that God was telling the truth, because of course God would be incapable of lying, and Abraham was sure God would keep his promise. But of course, Sarah was more skeptical. So then it happened. Sarah gave birth to a boy at the age of 75, I believe, and they named him Isaac. Now, Isaac was, of course, their pride and joy. Before this event, Abraham and Hagar, who was the housemaiden / servant of Sarah and Abraham, they had a child called Ishmael, and Ishmael was, of course, still Abraham's son, but at least in the Christian and Jewish versions of the story, Ishmael was, whether or not to say less favoured is possibly unfair on Abraham, but he was the child of Abraham and another woman. So when Abraham and Sarah had the child in Isaac, this was perhaps, we can speculate, a more profound moment in Abraham's life, because at long last, after years, decades of trying, Abraham and Sarah were finally able to have a healthy baby boy. And then we move on to the next part of the story, and this is where things can get a little bit dark. This is, of course, an argument many humanists and atheists would use against the benevolence of God, and this is where it gets a little bit tricky. So to test Abraham's faithfulness, God asks Abraham to sacrifice Isaac. Now, it's worth noting that before this sacrifice is to be made, Abraham has already told Hagar and Ishmael to go. After an argument between Hagar and Sarah, Hagar and Ishmael were sort of exiled from the tribe. So at this point, Abraham is pretty much down to one more son, basically. So to test Abraham's faithfulness, God asks Abraham to sacrifice his son. He asks Abraham to sacrifice his pride and joy. He asks Abraham to sacrifice Isaac. And because Abraham was so faithful, he had to do what God was asking. He had been unwavering in his faith to God all of his life. So at this point, Abraham is thinking, if God wills it, so it must be. So God tells Abraham, take your only son, Isaac. Of course, it's not his only son. It's his only son through his wife. And take your son who you love and go into the land of Moriah. Sacrifice him there as a burnt offering on one of the mountains of which I tell you. And of course, Abraham does indeed take Isaac up the mountain. Abraham and Isaac set off to the place where God had told him to make the sacrifice. Of course, because of the sentence which God had given Isaac, which included being burnt, Abraham and Isaac took wood to burn and a dagger to kill. Of course, Abraham never told Isaac what was going to happen, because, of course, how do you tell your son that God has told you he is going to be a sacrifice? Simple answer, you can't. There's no way around it. So this, in Abraham's mind, was the only way in which he could do it and not feel quite as distraught and as bad about the whole thing as he could be. Of course, he was still going to feel terrible because it's killing a very young boy. And this is when it happens. He takes Isaac up the mountain. Abraham had picked up the dagger. He had prepared an altar, and he had tied Isaac to it, so that the sacrifice was definitely going to happen. Abraham had no alternative view to doing this. This was God's will, and so be it. He was going to sacrifice his son for his God. And he raised the dagger. He raised the dagger up in his hand and was about to kill Isaac. But of course, this is where God says, he speaks down to Abraham. He says, "Do not lay your hand on the boy or do anything to him, for now I know that you fear God, seeing that you have not withheld your son, your only son, from me." So, in essence, he told Abraham to stop the sacrifice. Abraham had proved his faithfulness. Of course, this was all one big test of faith in which God was testing Abraham one last time to prove his faith and to prove that he is worthy of being the father of Israel, that he is worthy of founding this great nation. And of course, Abraham passed this test with flying colours, as he had done all this life, through all the hardships, all of the years of struggling with Sarah to make a life which he wanted to live, which they wanted to live together. This was the moment where everything had been confirmed to be true. Everything Abraham had done had been confirmed to be right. Of course, Abraham was pleased because he loved Isaac. He did not want to sacrifice Isaac. So this was a crucial moment in the life of Abraham, and this is where the sacrifice story of Isaac becomes so crucial, because humanists and atheists argue, if not all of them, of course, humanists and atheists will argue that how can God be so benevolent? How can God be so all-loving if he was willing to sacrifice Isaac? If he was willing to make Abraham so fearful of God because he had been told to sacrifice his son? And this is what some atheists and humanists will use to try to bring the argument against God being benevolent. But of course, this is also seen as something which is not quite what it seems, because God had no intention of Abraham sacrificing his son. This was all one big test to test the faith of Abraham in God. He wanted Abraham to love God, to have faith in God, but ultimately to be able to fear God. So this is a very tough situation, which has caused many debates between theologists and people of faith and people who can be anti-theist or atheist. This is a big series of discussion which occurs. I know myself, I have spoken to some of my pupils who I taught this subject to in year 7, and they themselves were unable to fathom how a loving God, an all-loving God, could tell Abraham to sacrifice his only son. But of course, the argument against this is it all was just a one big test to prove that Abraham is worthy, to prove Abraham would maintain his faith even in the face of adversity, even in sacrificing his only beloved son to God. And to address some of the differences in this story in Islam. So in Islam, the story is in some ways reversed. So whereas in the Christian Bible and the Jewish Torah, it is Isaac who is in the sacrifice situation where he was to be sacrificed in the name of Abraham's faith to God. In the Islamic version, it is Ishmael who is the preferred son, the one who is to be sacrificed Of course, in this version, Sarah is the one who gets sent away, whereas Hagar stays. So this is the difference in this part of the story. But perhaps the most significant difference in the story, which also bears a significant difference in Judaism and Islam as a whole, is that Ishmael is considered to be the forefather of the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him. And in this context, this means that all Muslims are descended from Ishmael, whereas in reverse, in Isaac's story, Isaac is the forefather of the Jewish people. So there's a bit of a situation here, because in one story, Ishmael is being sent away, so the forefather of all the Muslims is being sent away. And in the Islamic story, it's the other way around, and the forefather of all the Jewish people is being sent away by Abraham. So this creates a sort of debate, and this can be, in a lot of ways, considered to be one of the key issues in the modern day Palestine and Israel situation, which we currently have and have had for decades. So this is a very important part of the faiths, which surprisingly not a lot of people knew. I did not know this until a few months ago when I had a seminar on this topic. So this is a fascinating part of religion which should probably be shared more, because it helps people to understand that yes, there are vast differences in the three Abrahamic faiths, but there's also more that unites them than divides them. Like, for example, Jesus is a prophet in the Quran. So he's a prophet in the Quran. He's the only difference is he's not the Son of God, but much of the story of Jesus is still the same. Same as in Judaism. Jewish people still believe in Jesus, but they do not believe he is the Messiah. They do not believe he's the Son of God. Because how can the Messiah, who is supposed to free and save the people of Israel, the Jewish people, how can the Messiah free and save them if afterwards, after Jesus has done so, the things like the Holocaust can still happen? So this is why Jews do not see Jesus as the Messiah. Yes, he's still a significant figure. He's still a prophet within Judaism, but to them he cannot be the Messiah. He cannot be the chosen one, because there's still so much horror in the world, especially towards the Jewish people. So this is a significant thing which unites the three religions, and most importantly, they're all united in belief in one God. This is the core belief of all three religions. For Muslims, it's Tawheed. So this is the belief that there is one God and his name is Allah. In Judaism, they believe in Yahweh, and the Christians believe in God. It's the same God with a different title and different ways, though not as different as you may think, different ways of worshipping God and celebrating God and being faithful to God. And in all three faiths, Abraham was the perfect example of how you should demonstrate faith to God. You should maintain this faith no matter what happens, no matter the negativity, no matter the horrors of the world. You must maintain this faith in God, and that's what all three religions strive to do, and that's why Abraham is such an important figure in all three religions, because Abraham most embodied the spirit God and the Bible and the Torah and the Quran wish to see in a person devoted to God. So that was a quick run through in just around 25 minutes of the story of Abraham and the sacrifice and the call of Abraham, and a small bit of the differences within the three faiths, particularly within Islam, because the Islamic version is probably the most different of the three, because it has so much more cultural context to them and is therefore different. So that should bring episode 2 to a close, I think. If you have any suggestions for a future episode, please feel free to comment in the comment section of the Facebook page, which I have put together. So the HistoRE Symposium, it's called, as Facebook and Zuckerberg did not want me to be able to use HistoRE for some reason. I believe there's another HistoRE. It might not be pronounced the same way, but it's spelled the same way, and it's a clothing brand. So I guess I'm now rivals with a clothing brand. So thank you all for tuning in. Going forward, these episodes will get longer. At the moment, I'm finding my feet. Pacing is going to be a big thing, because when you're new to the world of podcasting or radioing or any of these things, you've got to learn how to pace yourself accordingly. And this is something which I'm going to do in time, because I have a thing where if you're from the UK, you'll know Jeremy Clarkson. He pauses in the middle of his sentences, and this is something I can be guilty of, especially when I'm doing a podcast where I have to do sharp, quick thinking. So again, thank you for bearing with me. Pacing is something which will come in time, and I look forward to hosting this show every week. It was going to be Thursday this week, but I've decided to do it early, so hopefully Monday could be the day going forward, but we'll keep you updated on that one. It might change week to week, I don't know, but I'd prefer to have it in a nice orderly schedule. So thank you once again for tuning in. Next week's episode is yet to be determined, but I'm thinking of doing it in something relating to the one of the Indian faith, so it could be either a Sikh, Buddhist, or Hindu episode, but we'll have to stay tuned for that. So once again, thank you all so much for tuning in, and I know it's the world is a grim place to be right now, but there's a lot of signs that things could hopefully start turning for the better. So as always, stay well, stay safe, and I hope to see you all back here next week. Thanks, guys.